about to break it down.
I'm all about being competitive, but that'd be one of the stupidest things I ever saw.
It is the breaking news, and by stupid, Cam Hayward is talking about the hit that we all saw on Thursday night football that led to a brawl. Myles Garrett and Mason Rudolph getting into it. Garrett taking Rudolph's helmet and hitting him over the head with it with just 8 seconds left in the game. We have been waiting on what the NFL will do. Joining us now by phone, our NFL insider, Adam Schefter. Adam, tell us exactly what the NFL has decided to do with all the players involved in last night's brawl.
Well, Kerry, moments ago, the news just came in from the NFL, and we finally have the long-awaited discipline that we expected on each of these particular players. Myles Garrett, the main instigator of this whole situation, has been suspended indefinitely and basically will not be allowed to play again this season, even if the Cleveland Browns go to the postseason. Myles Garrett no longer will be a part of it for his role in last night's melee in Cleveland. His season is finished. It is over. Okay, we have the Browns defensive tackle Larry Ogunjobi suspended 1 game. We have the Steelers center Marquise Pouncey suspended for 3 games. We have each of the organizations, the Browns and the Steelers, each fined $250,000. And each of the players, most notably Garrett, will have to go before Commissioner Goodell before he's reinstated in this particular case. We knew it would be unprecedented discipline, and it certainly is. It's one of the most severe penalties for an on-field act. We saw Vontaze Burfict suspended this year for the remainder of the season. That was a cumulative action, and we saw Albert Hainsworth back in 2006 suspended 5 games for stomping on the face of Andre Garrod. In this particular case, you've got a minimum 6-game suspension for Myles Garrett that he is now capable of appealing. But if he appeals, who thinks it's going to go in his favor? There aren't many people. The appeal would be rather futile in my mind. It's certainly within his right to represent himself and make his argument as to what happened. But everybody who saw that play knows it is unimaginable and unthinkable to think what he did to Mason Rudolph by using a helmet as a weapon. We now will have to hear from Mason Rudolph whether he decides to file charges. It was said this morning by his agent that he still was determining what course of action he will take, but we have the football fallout. Once again, that is now in 6 games minimum for Myles Garrett, 1 game for Larry Ogunjobi, which means the Browns are missing half their defensive line, starting defensive line for their next game as they try to make a playoff push. Marquise Pouncey, 3 games gone for, and each organization fined $250,000.
All right, so I need to break down a few things here because there are people at home who would probably say indefinitely means what? We know we will not see him for the rest of the season, including postseason, if in fact the Browns make it. But indefinitely means what, Adam Schefter?
Well, again, I will go by what the NFL said moments ago. At a minimum, for the remainder of the regular season and postseason, and he must meet with the commissioner prior to a decision on his reinstatement. And he also was fined an additional amount, Garrett was, for the unnecessary roughness and unsportsmanlike conduct, as well as the fighting and removing the helmet of an opponent and using the helmet as a weapon. So, I mean, that's the situation, basically, that it's a minimum of this season, and Roger Goodell will have to reinstate him for next season, right? Like, he could miss time. I think that they're going to want to hear that he's taking the right steps. Maybe they have him meet with counselors. Maybe they have him do that sort of thing. But before the NFL reinstates him, he's going to miss this season.
All right, let me ask you this quickly. Are you surprised that nothing happened to Rudolph? There are so many people this morning with takes of, well, he initiated it first in terms of taking Garrett's helmet off. Are you surprised? No action, no games, no suspension for Mason Rudolph.
Well, I'll say this, Carrie. The way it was told to me, and again, there are people who do blame Mason Rudolph, and there are people who don't. I don't know what's right and what's wrong. I know I had somebody mention to me that Mason Rudolph's hand was caught in Myles Garrett's helmet, and that's what happened. He couldn't get his finger out of the face mask. Now, is that true? Is that not true? Somebody mentioned that to me within the last 5 or 6 hours, and again, the league made the determination that in this particular case, Mason Rudolph was not at fault. We see 3 different players disciplined here, fines, suspensions. We don't see Mason Rudolph on the list. The NFL made the determination that in its judgment, it did not believe that Mason Rudolph instigated the fight or deserved discipline in the fight.
All right, that is Adam Schefter giving us the latest again. It is an indefinite suspension for Myles Garrett. We want to get the latest in terms of reaction from some of our NFL analysts. David, I'll send it over to you. Adam Schefter, thank you for joining us with the breaking news.
All right, Kerry, let's start with Stephen A., who joins us now. To put it in context, Myles Garrett, probably their best defensive player, team captain, doesn't have the rep as a dirty player like a guy like Vontaze Burfict does. But that, of course, was a vicious, dangerous act we saw last night, Stephen A. What do you make of the punishment for Myles Garrett?
I have no problem with it whatsoever. I think it's entirely appropriate. A matter of fact, I suspected that he would be suspended for the rest of the season. That's what I've been saying all morning, and obviously that transpired. And the fact that it's indefinite tells me that even though the league obviously will revisit the situation and let him back in, that he's going to miss some more games next season. I sincerely doubt that the National Football League is handing down an indefinite suspension only for him to meet with Roger Goodell, and then he starts off the season next year all anew. The NFL is going to want to send the message of how egregious this act was and how unacceptable it was by reminding not just its fan base that they're on top of it, but the players playing in the league of how unacceptable this is by making sure they go into next season with him suspended at least a couple of games just to serve it as a reminder and a deterrent for anybody who's thinking about emulating such an act. I think that's what this comes down to. It was egregious. It was unacceptable. It was inexcusable. Because you have Mason Rudolph's helmet. He clearly doesn't have a helmet. You're the bigger, stronger man. You've been just blitzing him, beating him up all night long. You had about 4 or 5 hits on him. With that game, with that particular play, it's 8 seconds left in the game that has already been decided. You're up 21-7. The clock is running out. It's the last play of the game, for crying out loud. You drive him into the ground. And so when you look at it from that perspective, all of those things had to be taken into consideration. I have no problem with this. I understand Max and others are focusing on Mason Rudolph being somewhat of an instigator. You're the smaller man. You're playing the quarterback position. Plus, you do not have a helmet on. No matter what argument can be made against Mason Rudolph, and we're certainly not absolving him from his role in all of this, it does not in any way excuse what Myles Garrett did. He had to be suspended for the year because if the NFL wanted to be consistent with this message of player safety, its message of discipline and conducting yourself appropriately and not impugning the integrity of the shield that is the National Football League, this is the kind of appropriate message that you had to send. Plain and simple.
Myles Garrett absolutely loses his mind, and he is going to pay for it, that's for sure. What about Maurkice Pouncey getting 3 games? I saw someone say that in the Steelers locker room, that guy is a hero for going after Garrett after what he did. Your thoughts on him being suspended for 3?
Predictable, but I don't like it. I understand that they had to do it. I would have preferred to see 1 instead of 3. I think the kick is what did it. But look at him. He's running over to the incident in question. Only when he sees Myles Garrett swing and connect from helmet to head on Mason Rudolph did he absolutely positively lose it. And that's why he's a hero in that locker room with the Steelers, because that's how you protect your quarterback. But like Pouncey said, he blacked out once he saw Garrett hit Mason Rudolph with the helmet, because you understand rules or no rules. That's something that you don't do. That exceeds the unwritten code. You just don't do something like that. And that's why he reacted that way. And so for me, I understand why the NFL had to take this kind of action, because, again, he's on the ground at this particular moment in time. And Pouncey is not just punching him, but kicked him in the head as well, although he had his helmet on. You can't condone that in any way either, which is why it's predictable that the National Football League elected to take the actions that it took. And I'm just going to say this, David, before you let me go. Listen, the fact of the matter is it's egregious no matter what. But when it comes to black men that are professional athletes, they're judged harshly. There's no question about it. And so you have to monitor what you're doing and how you're doing it because of how the perception is going to be out there about these young black men. Last night, Freddie Kitchens is in the post-game conference. And one of the first questions that they asked him was whether or not Myles Garrett had any connection or had taken any anger management classes. They waited forever to ask Richie Incognito that. But they immediately asked Freddie Kitchens about that with Myles Garrett, even though he didn't have an incident like this on his resume. These are the kind of things that a Troy Vincent, a black man who's an executive VP in the National Football League office, is going to pay attention to. He's not just an executive for the National Football League. He's a black man who happens to be an executive and is sensitive to the kind of imagery that is being disseminated out there. Derek Brooks, James Thrash, appeals officers who will hear this case in the event that Myles Garrett and the Players Association decides to appeal. They are black men. They're going to be highly sensitive to this kind of thing. And make no mistake about it, they had everything to do with the decision that's handed down, because even though Runyon is the guy that hands out the penalty, that stuff is written by Troy Vincent. He answers to Troy Vincent, okay? So make no mistake that this kind of penalty that came down from the office of Troy Vincent, obviously having the support of the commission and others, because that's how serious they take this kind of stuff. We can't ignore that, so I felt obligated
Stephen
to
A.,
let you know.
are you saying that if it was a white guy swinging his helmet at Mason Rudolph, there would have been some sort of a different outcome here?
No, not at all. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the black men who are in executive positions are going to have a heightened level of sensitivity to the perception from the public that's out there about a young black man that decides to take a helmet and swing it at the defenseless head of a quarterback in the National Football League. The actions of the National Football League, I believe, would have been consistent no matter who it was. But the reason I brought up the analogy is that Richie Incognito had a series of incidences throughout the years, and it took a little while for people to ask him about anger management issues. Myles Garrett never had an incident like this in his career until now. And in the press conference last night, immediately somebody was asking about anger management issues. As black men, it's something that we bring attention to. It's something that we point out. It's something that I use the airwaves of First Take and beyond to highlight to African Americans who happen to be professional athletes that, fair or unfair, the public at large is going to judge you accordingly. Be mindful of that so it can somewhat assist in dictating your actions so you don't find yourself in these kind of situations. Myles Garrett obviously never heard that message, or ignored it, or just blacked out and couldn't remember it, which is why he may have done what he did, and that's why he's going to face the punishment that he's facing. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. Myles Garrett, by the way, guy does unbelievable charity work.
Yeah.
He's a different cat. He's really into paleontology. He writes poetry.
Nice guy.
Of all things. An unlikely guy to play the villain, but the act speaks for itself. So we will not be seeing Myles Garrett for the rest of this 2019 season. Stephen A. sticking around to talk about the breaking news here into SportsCenter.
All right, David, I understand why you said that. We've met him. I know this was something in action that we thought was unlikely, but here we go. Let's do some history here. He's been flagged 6 times in his career for roughing the passer, unnecessary roughness, or disqualification. 4 of those have come this season. Garrett fined $42,000 for one of those calls in Week 2's game against the Jets. He was also fined $10,000 for punching Delaney Walker in the first week of the season. Nothing like what we saw, though, last night in terms of the